Welcome to the Republican Party convention edition of Talk Radio Town Hall.
Yeah, pretty cool.
With Congressman Cramer, my weekly cohort on statewide radio. And we're about to introduce a very special guest you brought along, huh?
Well, I don't know that I brought him along, but I did invite Dr. Carson. A couple of years ago, actually, we had a lunch or a breakfast in the Capitol with a number of House members, and he told me that North Dakota was the only state he hadn't visited. And of course, like always, we said you always save the best for last.
Right.
So I said, come on out and see North Dakota. It took a little longer than I thought, but I can't think of a better time to be here. This is a perfect time for Dr. Carson.
The best for last, absolutely.
How has it been so far?
Cold.
Remember, he's honest man. Remember that? He's honest man.
That's great. Yeah.
People are warm, though.
There you go. Well, it's good to have you here and looking forward to chatting with you a little bit about this crazy process. The first question is the most important because it comes from my daughter. She said, Dad, I want to know, how long does it take, how much school to be a neurosurgeon? So talk a little bit about what brought you to the medical profession and ultimately being a neurosurgeon.
Well, it takes a long time. College for 4 years, medical school for 4 years, a year of internship, and usually 6 to 7 years of residency. But I always tell young people, the time's going to go by anyway. So don't let that stop you if you've got youth on your side. And what's really wonderful is that you get to intervene in people's lives, very complex things, and give them longevity and quality of life. There's nothing better than that.
How has that experience, not only the work to get there, but also then obviously doing the work and the pressure cooker that is, informed what you do, what you have done in this race for president?
Well, it causes you to have to solve problems and frequently to use other resources and other people to solve those problems. So I think it's really an excellent preparation. Also, in my career I had a lot of controversy because I was always pushing the envelope. If something didn't work, I said, well, why doesn't it work? Well, we can't be satisfied with that, and we would come up with a way to make it work. And I think that has application to the political process as well.
Absolutely. Kevin?
I can't tell you anything about preparation as a neurosurgeon and how that prepares you to run for president, but I'm convinced he's got the right answer. It's pretty cool. You know what I would be interested in knowing, Dr. Carson, is now that you've been through this process, you've been to the Iowa State Fair and all the caucuses, New Hampshire, and while I think that's a rich part of our tradition, if you will, in choosing the president, I've always found it a bit, well, frankly, as a North Dakotan, I never liked that they got to pick the president and our candidate and create that early momentum that often leads to inevitability.
Sure.
Is there a better way to do this? And if so, what would you suggest?
Well, I do think there's got to be a better way. I'm sure that if the first primary had been in North Dakota and the second one in Utah, we would have had a completely different slate of front runners. And maybe we should be thinking about having a national primary all on the same day, because what we do with the polling and with the primaries and everything is we basically manipulate people into believing that this is inevitable and this is what has to be done. And people, you can't blame them. If the pundits say this and the polls are all saying this, and they say, okay, I guess that's what we have to do. So if I had votes from all the people who said, we love Carson and his policies, but he can't win, I would win.
Yeah, exactly.
No kidding. Good point. Where are we at right now as you see this race? You've obviously joined the Trump campaign and are very much a big part of this. So what would you say, where are we at? What is the game plan?
Well, where we're at is a very critical place, particularly for the Republican Party, because the issue is, are we going to accept the will of the people? Do we believe that the people have a say, or do we believe that the political establishment are the ones who should be picking our candidate? And I don't think you've ever had a clearer example of that than what's going on right now. So it's going to be extraordinarily interesting. And I hope that the political establishment recognizes that this is an opportunity to really broaden the Republican Party. If we reject the will of the people right now, I'm not sure that it's going to bode well for the future of the party.
Yeah, I mean, what do you come back from? I mean, even the back and forth and everything going on, the National Enquirer thing now. I mean, you've really got to. I mean, do you see any scenario in which Cleveland there's kumbaya?
It's going to be hard unless people. There's one scenario, and that is people become mature enough to say, this process has been put in place. Let it work, and let's not get in there and try to manipulate and distort the will of the people.
Are the party leaders or the establishment, for lack of a better term, capable of that?
I'm not sure they are. And when you talk about the party elites and the establishment, you're talking about both Democrats and Republicans. And they've been leading us down the same pathway for several decades now. And they're definitely not interested in an outsider coming in and disturbing that pathway.
I'm curious. I think there's a great deal of fascination about Donald Trump, obviously, right?
Yeah.
I mean, from the very moment that he said he was in this race, and everybody said, well, this will fade, and this will fade, and this will fade, and it really hasn't.
No, it hasn't.
And obviously you're inside that world now, and you've met with him and made a decision to support him, but tell us about the Donald Trump you see one-on-one in his office versus the Donald Trump that we see in a Chris Matthews interview on MSNBC or at some rally.
Well, he's not a politician. So this will not be the last time that they will trip him up. Politicians, you see a kid, ask him a question, he has a really smooth, polished answer, and people say, wow, you're going to be a politician. He's not, and he probably never will be one. But he is a very caring person. He cares a lot about America and the success of America. And he's very frustrated, like millions of other Americans, that we seem to be constantly losing and constantly on the downward slide. We don't have to be. Fixing our economy is not that tough. If we get rid of unnecessary regulations and reform the tax code and create an environment that encourages entrepreneurial risk-taking and capital investment, believe me, it will take off. If we stop doing things that punish our manufacturers and our workers, believe me, they will take off. And, if we take a leadership position on the world stage, a lot of the adventurism from some of our adversaries will stop. These are things that I think that Donald Trump understands. Now, he may not be the smoothest operator, when it comes to speaking, but his heart is in the right place.
Do you cringe when he says Lion Ted and Little Marco, and kind of the sort of the reality TV star? Supposedly his wife does. We talked to him shortly after we talked to you on Friday, and he acknowledged that he gets some grief about that from even family members. But that worries me a little bit as someone that sees that. Does it you?
Well, it does, but at the same time, I do realize that he is responding to what the people reward. They don't necessarily reward, cerebral, calm, logical. They don't necessarily.
You found that out, right?
I did.
For a while, though, they did. But one of the most amazing times in this whole presidential race was when he was, first you were in second, and both between the two of you had, a gigantic support out there. It was more, I want somebody other than a politician.
Yeah.
But with two different approaches, and his won, didn't it?
His was the approach that resonated with the people.
Why? Why do you think they're that mad?
Well, I think at that particular time, something happened that was pretty unusual, and that was the Paris attack and San Bernardino. And people equate bombast with strength. And, it's just one of those things. But I believe that God is in charge, and things work out the way that they're supposed to. And so doesn't mean that you don't stop doing everything that you can to save the country, and that's what it's all about.
There's a fair amount of Christians that I hear from who say, Scott, I hear you on the radio, you aren't afraid of your faith, you talk about it. How in the world can you be for Donald Trump? How could a good man of faith be for Donald Trump? And you hear that a fair amount.
I do hear that a lot.
What do you say to those people?
I say, well, what's the alternative? I say, Ted Cruz will never bring over the people from the middle and the left. It's not going to happen. John Kasich has no pathway. So he's the only Republican, unless you want to go with the Democrats. And if you're a person of faith, are you really going to align yourself with killing babies and redefining marriage and all the whole host of things that go with them? A platform that last year they didn't even want the word God mentioned in it. So I think the choice is pretty clear. And having spoken to Donald about this, he's very open to Christ, to Christianity. He has been talking about stopping the slaughter of Christians overseas, I think more so than anybody else.
You know, Scott, that raises a great point. And my observation of Mr. Trump has been as well that he, you know what's important to us is that somebody defends religious liberty. Whether they're exactly where we are in faith or not, that's not really the issue. The fact that they're open to it, we should celebrate, right? As Christians, we should celebrate it. And I do celebrate that. And I think sometimes as people of faith, we're the hardest, especially on new Christians or, you know, this is when we ought to be welcoming them. And so I grieve a little bit, this sort of rejection of somebody who's still in many respects processing it, right? We understand that. And it seems like it seems like the presidency might be a weird time to have a conversion experience. On the other hand, what better time? I mean, Abraham Lincoln said, you know, he wasn't a Christian until very late in his life, nearly the end of his life. But even he, as a seeker, said that many times he was driven to his knees by the conviction that he had nowhere else to go.
And people who are open are frequently much better candidates than somebody who believes that they're righteous but doesn't act that way.
Do you know any of those?
I'm not mentioning any names.
None of us know any of those. Yeah, exactly right. Should he talk about it more?
I think it would be a good thing for him to talk about, and I think he will talk about it more. I'm pretty sure that's going to be happening in the near future.
He does maybe need a little next layer of help on Planned Parenthood. You can help him out there, right? And I know where he's getting at, right? Because probably there's some political strategy in that to say we'll defund them, but to the extent they're doing cancer screenings, why would we criticize him for that? Is that what's going on?
Well, what he really just requires there is some education. You know, they talk about all the wonderful things they do, but the majority of what they do is kill babies.
Right.
And you know, it doesn't take a lot of research to find that out.
Yeah. One other issue I want to get into, Kevin, I know you probably have others as well, is I think you know, humility is something that would really be a welcome attribute to politics in general, right?
Absolutely.
But certainly the presidential race, and you certainly had brought that to this race. You didn't want this race. You didn't say I'm running. You were drafted in. You were encouraged. People said do it, and finally there was enough support. Are they polar opposites? I mean, can you be a humble, you know, genuinely humble political leader and become president of the United States? Because you got to go out and say all kinds of great things about yourself.
Well, I think it's possible. One of the things that I'm hopeful that my candidacy showed Americans is that it is possible for somebody who's not a dyed-in-the-wool, long-time politician to actually do well in this process. And I hope it will encourage other citizen statesmen to get in the arena, because we need a broad group of people from which to select our leaders, not just career politicians.
You know, and I think to that end, that's an important point to remind Republicans that this is we know our field did start out with around 20 people from a very broad experience and spectrum, geographically, experience-wise, politically, that we really are the diverse party. And while the process whittles it down a bit, everybody leaves a mark. Everybody that was there on that first stage, that first time, leaves a part of them with whoever remains at the end. That's the beauty of our process, and I sometimes think we don't celebrate enough. Now, I will say this. In Dr. Carson's case, this is probably more profound than in any. The issue you discussed about humility, the issue you discussed about bombast, as you said, that's sometimes mistaken for strength. I remember that moment. I remember Dr. Carson so well after the Paris bombings, when you specifically said, I think to a question about this, you said something to the fact that when people start listening to the content of what I say as much as the volume, I think they'll listen. And at that moment, I thought, I'm not sure of that. I agree with you, they should. But at that moment, volume was part of the formula. I think that's a little unfortunate, but I do think in retrospect, if a lot of people could rethink it, you know what I'm saying? In other words, I think that shapes not only the politics, but I think it shapes the country. That's the other beautiful thing. And that's why what you're doing here, what you're doing, continuing in this process, rather than just going home, which you could have easily done, is an invaluable contribution to our party and to our politics, because you're helping all of us be better. And
And that was the purpose of it in the first place, to save our country. I don't care about a position for myself, quite frankly. That's completely unimportant to me. But if we can save the country for the next generations, it's worth every bit of effort that we put into it.
Last question, fast forward to November, and for your benefit, we'll assume Donald Trump's the Republican nominee, and Hillary Clinton, if the FBI doesn't catch her between now and then, is the Democratic nominee. He wins. He becomes President of the United States. How, 4 years from now, is the United States of America different under a Trump administration?
Well, I think, first of all, it won't take that long to straighten out the economy and have a robust economy going. Fixing the tax code, getting rid of unnecessary regulations, and creating the right environment will have a profound effect, which means that we can then have the resources that we need to strengthen our military and to update our nuclear arsenal and to take the kind of aggressive leadership position that we should have in the world. I think you will see that going on. I do not think you will see people kicking sand in our face, that's for sure.
Thanks for doing what you did, and for the right reasons, trying to make this a better place to live. Putting you and your wife and your family through this, and what you've done the last few months, and for coming to North Dakota this weekend as well.
My family was great. My wife has been a trooper. She developed quite a stomp speech herself, and she was out there. She was very popular, let me tell you.
That's awesome. Thanks a lot, Dr. Carson.
All righty, thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. This was fun.
it was a blast. I think this might be the best talk radio town hall we've ever done.
We've done a lot.
We've done a lot. We do it every week.